She caught her husband cheating, so she became the mafia boss's ultimate weakness. Talk about the greatest revenge upgrade in history. Elena was a quiet, ignored wife until her husband made the fatal mistake of sleeping with Roman Castelli's wife. Instead of crying and begging, Elena walked away cold. The ruthless crime lord saw a dark survival instinct in her that nobody else did. But when you get into bed with a lethal monster to escape a cheater, you might just find out the monster is exactly what you needed. We are stepping into a world where power speaks in whispers, not screams. Picture Roman Castelli standing in a ballroom gilded in gold and quiet terror. He is a man who understands that true authority is a heavy shadow, chilling everything it touches. Tonight is not about syndicate business or hostile takeovers. It is about a much older, deeper wound, the betrayal of the home. Two strangers, worlds apart in status, are about to discover their partners have been watering seeds of deceit behind their backs. Stick with me, because we are going to watch a victim become the architect of her own fate. Remember this, loyalty is a rare currency, so spend it only on those who earn it. For Elena Marrow, this was the night she finally learned to spot the counterfeit souls among the elite. The atmosphere in that room was suffocating, heavy with the scent of imported perfume and the kind of arrogance that only unlimited wealth can buy. Overhead, crystal chandeliers cast a cold, unforgiving light on the crowd. Elena stood near the edges, wearing a dress that suddenly felt like paper armor in a room full of wolves. Corrupt politicians traded hollow laughs, while suited men spun webs of deceit, ignoring the partners standing right beside them. It is a harsh truth we all face. Eventually you can buy the finest silk, but all the wealth in the world cannot purchase a shred of actual class. Elena did not belong in this gilded cage. She was merely an anchor for Victor, the husband who sold her a quiet dream, only to leave her stranded while he chased his dirty ambitions. Victor had given his instructions in car: smile, stay close, and act the part of the perfect silent prize. Yet the moment they crossed the threshold, he vanished in the sea of silken suits. 43 minutes bled away. Elena stared at a dark phone screen, the silence echoing louder than the dull jazz playing in the background. This was the rhythm of their marriage now, dragged into the spotlight only to be discarded the second a more lucrative shadow appeared. If someone treats your presence like a temporary accessory, you must find the strength to walk away. While the band played on, ruthless men around her were busy sealing handshake deals that would quietly ruin the lives of the innocent by morning. And morning, Victor, it seemed, was busy ruining hers in the shadows. Feeling entirely invisible had become her default state at these masquerades of wealth. But the illusion shattered when a voice, sharp and cold as winter ice, cut through the noise, asking if she was searching for her husband. Elena turned, immediately realizing why the surrounding crowd had gone utterly still. Standing there was Roman Castelli. He was not just wealthy, he was the kind of apex predator whose name media outlets swallowed out of sheer terror. Always remember, the most dangerous people are those who have everything to hide and nothing to lose. Behind his charity gala smiles, Roman was the architect of an underground empire forged in fear and absolute loyalty. He was a man who erased problems without leaving a single footprint in the snow for anyone to ever find. He stood uncomfortably close, draped in a custom suit that mocked her entire net worth. His gray eyes were empty, hollowed out by a lifetime of witnessing human greed. Elena stammered an apology, caught entirely off guard by his suffocating presence. Roman merely repeated Victor's name, noting with clinical precision that she had been staring at an empty phone for 20 minutes. She tried to maintain her polite mask, claiming Victor was just mingling. But Roman stripped away the polite fiction with a single sentence. He told her Victor was upstairs, occupying a private room with Roman's own wife. The music played on, yet for Elena, the floor simply ceased to exist. The truth always strikes when you are least prepared, so brace yours. She stood paralyzed, choking on denial. Roman did not offer a flicker of pity. He listed the coordinates of their shared ruin: the 4th floor, a private luxury suite, the heavy door with the gold handles. The frost in his tone was absolute. Elena began to physically tremble, desperately claiming he must have the wrong man. But her voice was hollow, even to her own ears. Roman held her gaze, a silent judge, asking if she truly believed he could make such a mistake. Then, the floodgates broke. Every ignored warning sign rushed her. The night's Victor came home at 2 a.m, carrying the scent of cheap perfume, the hushed phone calls, the screen angled away. Trust your gut, because ignoring the glaring red flags will will only ensure you burn when the fire finally reaches your feet. The excuses had all been lies. Her knuckles turned white against the crystal glass. With a trembling breath, she looked at the syndicate boss and asked why he was sharing this poison with her. Roman exhaled, a rare crack in his armor, confessing he had spent 3 months tricking him into believing it was just paranoia. He glanced toward the private staircase, his guards turning a blind eye to the impending storm, and declared he was done pretending. When Elena gently spoke his wife's name, Serafina held in Roman's jaw. He described how she had become a stranger in her own skin 6 months prior. Take heed, when a partner's habits drastically shift overnight, those are the loudest alarms. Suddenly, she was buying new wardrobes and obsessing over charity balls she used to utterly despise. Then came the final, devastating piece of puzzle. Roman pointed out that Victor had suddenly developed an intense interest in those very same events. The room spun wildly for Elena. She whispered that it was impossible. Clinging to the rotting wood of their 4-year marriage, Roman countered with a deadpan finality, admitting he had spun the exact same lies for his own wife while watching her frantically delete messages. You and I know keeping secrets is a fast track to ruin, and demanding absolute honesty is the only way forward. Desperate for an anchor, Elena searched her memory for the last time Victor had touched her with genuine affection, or spoken to her without viewing her as a burden. The tragedy was absolute silence. She drew a complete agonizing blank. Roman clarified he had not dressed in a fine suit to throw a childish tantrum. He was there to carve out undeniable proof. Elena looked up, her voice a fragile wire, and asked what the next move was. Roman locked his hollow eyes onto hers and presented the ultimate choice. She could retreat to her car, drive home, and continue watering a dead plant, or she could climb those stairs and look the truth in the eye. Listen closely. Running from reality only guarantees the crash will destroy you when it finally hits. Elena's pulse was a war drum in her ears. A huge part of her wanted to flee into the night and pretend this mob boss never existed. But the buried, neglected spark of anger inside her finally caught fire. Her feet shifted toward the stairs, ready to embrace the flames. They walked across the grand ballroom in absolute silence, and Elena watched the high society crowd part like water before the bow of a warship. People reacted to Roman with pure, primal instinct. Even the massive men guarding the private stairs took one glance at the boss and dissolved in the shadows. True power is quiet, and the lesson here is that genuine authority never has to raise its voice to command the room. They ascended the cold marble steps, leaving the hall laughter and jazz music far beneath them. The 4th floor, lined with expensive wood and silent art. And there, waiting at the very end of the long, suffocating hallway, was the final reckoning, a heavy, imposing door equipped with bright polished gold handles. A thin sliver of pale light bled from beneath the doorframe. Roman stopped 10 feet away, his voice a ghost as he confirmed they had arrived. Elena stared at the painted wood as if it were a Dorman bomb. She whispered a plea, asking what would happen if they were entirely mistaken. Roman answered with heavy, crushing silence. Elena forced her paralyzed legs to carry her forward, her fingers brushing the freezing metal handle. She knew turning it meant burning 4 years of false promises to ash. It is a painful reality that facing the ugly truth requires immense courage, but living a comfortable lie will slow rot your soul. Roman stood behind her, a marble statue waiting for the strike. Elena dragged in a sharp breath, closed her eyes, and shoved the heavy door open. The suite was a sprawling display of wealth, framed by massive windows overlooking the city lights. In the dead center stood her husband, Victor, locked in an intimate embrace with Roman's wife, Serafina. She looked like a flawless porcelain doll in designer silk. But the only image burning into Elena's mind was Victor's hand resting on his low back as the heavy door swung wide. As the door swung wide, the lovers froze like prey caught in a hunter's snare. The silence in the room was deafening. All the color violently drained from Victor's face, his pathetic excuses dying in his throat before he could stammer his wife's name. We have to understand that betrayal is a dangerous wager, and the truth always collects its debts. His fragile stolen fantasy was completely, utterly dead. Let us look at this opening scene piece by piece, shall we? Elena does not shed a single tear or throw a desperate fit. She just stands frozen in the doorway, feeling the foundation of her marriage shatter into dust. Across the room, Serafina is scrambling, her eyes darting around like a trapped animal looking for an emergency exit. She tries to spin the narrative, stammering Roman's name and begging him to believe it is a misunderstanding. Roman stops the panic with two quiet words. Do not. He does not shout. Yet the air in the suite turns to absolute ice. Examining Gil pair like a judge finalizing a grim sentence. Simple truth is that betraying someone who holds all the power will always cost you everything. The pathetic nature of guilt is truly fascinating to watch. Victor stands there trembling in his expensive shoes, completely stripped of his usual confidence. He tries to plead his case, but Roman cuts the excuses dead with a single question. How long? Serafina remains frozen in the background, unable to even look her husband in the eye. When Victor chokes on his shame and admits this affair has been going on for months, you can physically see the life drain out of Elena. She grabs the heavy wooden door frame just to stop her knees from giving out. She spent countless late nights blaming hers, convinced she was the problem in their marriage. Never take the blame for someone else's broken character. Elena finally forces out a quiet why, her voice hollow and defeated. Victor actually has the nerve to look his wife in the eye and say he does not know why he did it. The excuse is so incredibly pathetic that Elena almost lets out a bitter laugh. He speaks as if infidelity is just a random accident, like tripping on the sidewalk and somehow falling into another woman's bed. Elena fires back, asking how he simply forgot about his vows. Meanwhile, Serafina finally finds her courage and begs Roman to talk things through. But Roman operates on an entirely different level. He slowly adjusts his silver cufflinks with the cold precision of a man preparing for war. He tells her the choice was hers, and the consequence will be his. In moments of profound disrespect, walking away in total silence is the loudest answer you can possibly give. The silence that follows drops like a heavy stone, making the air feel impossible to breathe. Victor desperately tries to close the distance between him and Elena, whispering frantic apologies. But she raises a hand, completely shutting down his approach. Her voice does not shake anymore. Stick with me here because this is the exact moment the illusion breaks for her. She looks at the man she married and realizes she is staring at a complete stranger. It is a harsh lesson we all must learn eventually. Do not ignore a field of red flags just because you are in love with a fictional version of a person. She asked him how many times he looked her in the eye and lied. How many nights did he come home to her right after leaving that hotel? His fake tears mean absolutely nothing now. Looking directly at the man who broke her heart, Elena delivers a cold dose of reality. She tells him he is not sorry for the betrayal. He is only sorry the lie finally caught up with him. She turns her back to the room, and Victor falls to pieces, begging her to stay. For a fraction of a second, her footsteps slow down. Habit tries to pull her back in the cycle of forgiveness. But the memory of all those lonely, anxious nights pushes her forward. She tells him the marriage ended the second he decided Serafina was worth the risk. Without looking back, she walks out of the suite with total dignity. Roman follows silently in her wake, leaving his own ruined marriage behind. The ultimate lesson is clear. Stop offering your loyalty to people who treat your heart like an option. The walk through the luxury hotel is nothing but a smear of lights and noise. Elena does not remember passing the ballroom or taking the grand staircase. The shock only begins to wear off when the freezing night air hits her skin, and the first heavy tears finally break free. The city sidewalks are crowded with people laughing and talking, completely unaware that her entire universe has just collapsed. Then she notices Roman stepping out of the glass doors to stand beside her. He does not offer empty promises or hollow words of comfort. He stands there, sharing the bitter cold with a stranger who shares his exact pain. When someone's world falls apart, quiet presence is often the greatest gift you can give. Elena wipes her eyes. What they do now. Roman just whispers now. He looks out over the city skyline and delivers a response that changes both their lives. Now they learn what it costs to betray the wrong people. The calm certainty in his voice makes the hair on the back of her neck stand up. Overwhelmed, Elena stammers that she is not looking for a cinematic revenge story. She just wants to find peace again. Roman assures her she will not have to lift a single finger, but he promises those two will choke on their regrets. The most terrifying part is his absolute lack of raised volume. Controlled anger is always more dangerous than a loud outburst. Shivering in the wind, Elena mutters that she needs to get to her sister's apartment. Roman silently hands her a thick, unmarked white card with nothing but a phone number on it. Before stepping away, Roman tells her to use the number if she needs anything, or if Victor refuses to leave her alone. Elena stares down at the heavy card in her shaking hands and asks the question hanging in the air. Why would a feared crime boss go out of his way to help her? Roman lets his guarded expression slip for a brief second. He explains that they were both deeply wounded by the exact people who promised to keep them safe. He knows the terrible isolation of standing in a crowded room and reeling you have nobody left. Shared trauma is a strange way of forging the strongest alliance. He looks her in the eye, promises she is not alone anymore, and disappears into the dark street. She holds a card with no name, because men like Roman Castelli do not require introductions. His reputation precedes him in every corner of the city. Elena drops the thick card into her purse and starts walking without a destination, desperate to put miles between herself and the hotel. Halfway down the block, her phone begins vibrating frantically in her pocket. It is Victor, blowing up her screen with 17 missed calls and a dozen desperate messages begging for one more chance. It is a classic move from a guilty conscience, but she is done playing the fool. Elena presses the power button until the screen goes black, cutting him off completely. Some mistakes simply do not earn a second chance. They only earn a permanent exit from your life. She eventually finds refuge at her sister's apartment, locking the door and retreating into complete silence for 3 long days. For 3 full days, she exists like a ghost in the Gestant cry, and she routinely deletes dozens of pathetic messages from Victor without reading a single word. Her sister Maya handles the situation perfectly. She does not demand answers or offer unsolicited advice. She just keeps the coffee hot and lets Elena stare blankly at the well. Sometimes, the most loving way to help a person heal is simply giving them the quiet space to process their grief. On the 4th morning, the silence finally breaks. Elena looks up from her mug and tells Maya she needs to hire a lawyer. When Maya asks if she is ready to file for divorce, Elena corrects her with a cold, steady voice. She wants to completely ruin him. Maya nods and says she knows an attorney who thrives on destruction. Elena stands by the living room window, watching the endless stream of traffic below. It is a harsh reality of human existence that the world refuses to stop spinning, even when your personal life is burning to the ground. Life does not hit pause for your heartbreak, and making peace with that fact is a crucial step in moving forward. She walks back to kitchen counter and powers on her phone for the first time in days. A flood of pathetic voicemails from Victor immediately clogs her screen. But a single message from an unknown number catches her attention. The text explains that her husband tried causing a scene at his corporate building, and security forcefully threw him out. It ends with a promise to deal with Victor personally. It is signed with 2 letters, R and C Roman Castelli. You and I have probably both held on to things for too long, but Elena is finally letting go. She saves the mysterious number into her contacts and begins a systematic purge of her digital life. Every happy selfie, every shared memory, and every message from Victor gets permanently erased from her phone. Removing toxic people from your daily orbit is the only real way to protect your peace. From the sofa, Maya watches her work and quietly asks about the man behind the initials. Elena does not look up from her screen. She simply describes him as a man who understands the heavy price of loyalty. The naive woman who accepted crumbs and called it love died back in that hotel suite. The final lesson is clear. You must never shrink your own worth just to keep a broken relationship alive. Let us examine the metamorphosis of heartbreak. What replaces Elena's sorrow is an unyielding resolve. 3 days later, she enters the domain of Caroline Reeves, an attorney whose reputation is built on the ruins of unfaithful men. They convene in an ice boardrooms, a fitting arena for a bloodless execution. Caroline, radiating the calculated polish of an apex predator, produces a legal pad and demands the unvarnished truth. Elena delivers it all. She dissects the infidelity and the psychological warfare Victor weaponized to make her doubt her own sanity. Here, a profound truth emerges. Our intuition is the ultimate guardian of our reality. Always trust the quiet alarm of your own instincts, for they often recognize the danger long before the mind is willing to accept it. Caroline processes this trauma with the chilling efficiency of a machine, her pen barely lifting from the paper. She immediately pivots to the architecture of Victor's wealth. Elena catalogs the joint accounts, the marital estate, and the murky labyrinth of his business ventures. When Caroline confirms there is no generational wealth insulating him, a predatory smirk crosses her face. Then comes the ultimate psychological test. She asks Elena if she merely wants her rightful share, or if she wishes to entirely obliterate his empire. Elena clenches her jaw. Both, she replies. Caroline unveils a strategy of absolute financial starvation, preparing to freeze every asset and drag his secrets into the light. It reminds us of a timeless absolute. The most dangerous adversary is simply a person who no longer has anything left to protect. Caroline offers a necessary dose of brutal realism. She warns that this legal theater will devolve into a grueling war of attrition, and Victor will undoubtedly retaliate. Yet, Elena meets this warning with glacial composure, simply stating, "Let him fight." Caroline studies her, deeply intrigued by this emotional attachment. She notes how often clients weep in these chairs, secretly harboring a pathetic hope for reconciliation. Elena's flat rejection of that fantasy is striking. There is immense power in recognition when a narrative has reached its permanent conclusion, a lesson we must internalize to truly move forward. For the next hour, Elena signs a mountain of documents, methodically sealing the tomb of her former life. Just as they reach the elevator, Caroline casually drops a psychological landmine, uttering a name that changes everything. Serafina Castelli. Let us pause and unpack the tragic naivety at play here. Caroline stares at her client as if Elena has entirely lost her grip on reality. She issues a dire warning about Roman Castelli, a man who operates outside the boundaries of human morality. Yet Elena is blinded by a desperate need for validation, defending Roman over a seemingly gentle text message. Caroline shatters this illusion immediately. Men who orchestrate syndicates do not perform acts of charity without an ulterior motive. As Elena steps into the elevator, she stubbornly clings to the romanticized idea that Roman shares her profound sense of betrayal. Caroline knows this narrative only ends in tragedy. The reality is quite simple, and it applies to us all. When a known predator suddenly offers you a velvet glove, you must always look for the iron fist hiding inside it. In the solitary confinement of the descending elevator, Elena watches the floor numbers plummet. She retrieves her phone, studies Roman's words, and finally drafts a reply. She types out her gratitude for his revelation and confirms the divorce filing. Almost instantaneously, Roman responds, assuring her that a traitor deserves no mercy. Stepping out into the biting winter air, Elena experiences a profound alchemy. The crushing weight of her sorrow is transmuting into a pure, unadulterated fury. Meanwhile, miles away, her husband is oblivious to the apocalyptic storm a crime syndicate is preparing for him. There is a vital lesson in this emotional shift. Righteous anger is a far superior survival mechanism than passive grief. You must allow that inner fire to forge a path forward, rather than letting the ashes of sadness bury you. We must observe the systematic dismantling of Victor's fragile empire. It begins with the subtle erosion of certainty. A lucrative deal crumbles at the final signature. An investor vanishes into thin air. Victor, desperate to maintain control, rationalizes this as a mere string of misfortune. But by the second week, the illusion of coincidence evaporates. 3 massive financial backers sever ties. His cornerstone client departs without a word, and his essential staff abandons ship. Sitting amidst the wreckage of his ledger, Victor feels the nausea of a man watching his life's work dissolve. Then his assistant delivers the fatal blow. His wife's attorney is holding on line 1. The lesson here is inescapable. When you provoke a predator of unimaginable influence, there are no coincidences. Clinging to denial will only ensure the inevitable collapse crushes you entirely. Notice how quickly arrogance collapses under pressure. Victor answers the telephone, his hands visibly trembling. Caroline's voice greets him, a masterclass in weaponized professionalism. She informs him the divorce is in motion, and he will be served within 24 hours. Victor spirals into panic, begging for an audience with his wife. Caroline silences him with surgical precision. She denies his request and demands a granular audit of his entire financial existence. Victor feels the warmth drain from his veins. He realizes here she has already charted the waters where he buried his hidden wealth. The takeaway here is profound yet practical. Never attempt to manipulate someone who has fortified their position with undeniable leverage. When the reckoning arrives, every shadow you thought was safe will be violently exposed to the sun. Cornered and desperate, resort performative outrage, shouting his ledgers are spotless. Caroline absorbs his outburst and calls the bluff, smoothly inviting him to provide the documentation before severing the connection. She delivers a chilling mandate: remain entirely absent from Elena's orbit or face a restraining order. The silence of the deadline echoes the vaporization of his identity. Operating purely on panic, he dials his mistress, Serafina. He begs for tether to reality, but she instantly severs his hope. She is drowning in her own catastrophe, terrified of the man orchestrator. The lesson to extract from this chaos is vital. Panic renders you tragically predictable. When the structure of your deceit begins to crumble, the architect of your betrayal is the last person capable of offering you salvation. The unraveling accelerates as Victor screams that Roman is the phantom architect of his ruin. Serafina's voice is brittle with terror as she commands him to never contact her again. She reveals Roman has initiated a divorce, and any association with Victor will instantly void her financial survival. Victor is paralyzed by this betrayal, demanding to know how she could abandon him. Serafina slices through his romantic delusions with absolute precision. She lists the casualties of his arrogance: a hemorrhaging business, a vengeful wife, and a mafioso actively erasing his footprint from the earth. When Victor weakly invokes her promises of love, he receives a devastating lesson in human nature. Those who thrive in the shadows of deceit will always prioritize their own preservation. Loyalty grown in the toxic soil of betrayal will never survive a genuine storm. Serafina shatters the illusion entirely. "I simply told you exactly what your ego needed to hear," she confesses, before terminating the call. Victor is left marinating in the suffocating silence of a darkened office, paralyzed as a decade of ambition dissolves into ash. Somewhere across the city, Roman Castelli is undoubtedly savoring the scent of this burning empire. We jump forward 3 weeks, returning to that sterile conference room where Elena sits across from Caroline. The attorney slides a dossier across the table, illustrating a corporate massacre. Banks are recalling loans, partners are filing litigation, and the company is functionally deceased. This sequence forces us to confront an intriguing reality. We often expect karma to operate on a gradual cosmic timeline, yet occasionally, a figure of supreme influence chooses to intervene and deliver that retribution entirely by hand. Let us examine Elena's psychogoldic friction in this moment. She studies the financial ruin, baffled by how mathematically rapid this destruction has been. Caroline leans back, diagnosing the situation with clinical detachment. An invisible hand is actively erasing Victor from the market. Elena instantly recognizes the shadow of Roman Castelli, but Caroline forces a pivot to the pragmatic reality. If Victor is reduced to poverty, there is no marital settlement left to claim. They must harvest the capital before the well runs dry. Elena stares at the paperwork, caught between the intoxicating of vengeance and a creeping dread. She quietly confesses she never intended for Roman to scorch the earth this thoroughly. Herein lies a critical warning for us all. When you invite a predator to neutralize your enemy, you must accept they will never care about the collateral damage left behind. Caroline meets this hesitate with an unblinked air. The destruction already in motion, and their only imperative is to extract the remaining wealth. Elena slowly closes the dossier, her resolve finally solidifying into certainty. She authorizes Caroline to secure dollars she is legally owed. If bankruptcy is the byproduct, it is simply the tax levied upon his betrayal. Crucially, Elena refuses to let this war deform her into a creature consumed by spite. As she reaches the door, Caroline pauses her, noting that true arena of divorce. Elena looks back and delivers a masterclass in quiet power. She suggests that Verum Suri is exactly why her spirit will survive, while Victor's will perish. It is a profound concluding thought. Maintaining your moral integrity amidst a betrayal is the ultimate triumph. Never allow the toxicity of another to rewrite your character. Elena barely reaches the elevator when her phone cuts through the dim hallway. A message from Roman assures he is handling Victor's attempts to reach Serafina. That phrase sends a profound coldness through her, an instinctual reckoning that the mob is now speaking on her behalf, refusing to be a passive pawn in this cycle of retribution. She dials his number. He answers instantly, his tone impossible calm. She demands a meeting to discuss his vendetta. Stripping away his illusion of protection, he falls silent, calculating, before naming an obscure coffee shop downtown. Let us look at this piece by piece, shall we? When a dangerous figure offers to solve your problems, you must define their methods immediately, or you risk becoming complicit in a tragedy you never asked for. He gives her 20 minutes. Every instinct begs Elena to run, warning her that sharing space with a syndicate leader is a point of no return. Yet, when you are already drowning in the wreckage of your own life, the deep end loses its terror. 23 minutes later, she pushes open the door to a remarkably ordinary cafe. The mundane setting only magnifies Roman's lethal presence. Sitting in the back corner in a dark suit, he radiates an authority that could swallow the entire neighborhood whole. She takes a breath and sits opposite him. The takeaway here is quiet but heavy. When your reality has shattered, A calculated risk is often the only path to reclaiming your narrative. You just cannot afford to forget the teeth of the predator sitting across the table. Under the harsh lighting, the impenetrable boss appears deeply fatigued. The intimidation remains, but Elena observes the human exhaustion bleeding through his armor. He slides a black coffee across the table, a quiet proof that he studies people. She accepts it but immediately confronts him, demanding an end to the systemic destruction of Victor's company. She holds his gaze and tells him to stop. Roman barely blinks. He leans back, analyzing her motives, and asks a single question. Why? She counters that annihilating a man does not rewrite history or erase the sting of infidelity. There is a profound truth in her argument. Vengeance might offer a fleeting high, but it is essentially swallowing poison and waiting patiently for your enemy to choke. Notice the terrifying clarity of his worldview here. Roman asks if retribution is truly hollow or if it is the only mechanism that ensures consequences for cruelty. Gripping her cup, Elena argues that destroying Victor only breeds another monster. She clings to the belief that trauma should be processed through mediation, not warfare. But Roman leans forward, pulling the gravity of the room with him. He explains that, while this infidelity was an emotional wound for her, in the syndicate, it was a direct assault on his authority. If he allows this disrespect to pass, the entire underworld will smell blood in the water. We can draw a bitter truth from his ruthless logic. Boundaries are entirely meaningless if you lack the will to enforce them. Granting mercy to those who exploit you is often an act of self-destruction. Pinning her under a cold stare, Roman strips away any remaining illusion. He is not dismantling Victor out of a fiery passion. He is doing it out of grim necessity. The weight of his reality crashes over Elena. This man is not merely a wounded spouse seeking closure. He is an architect of violence whose empire is cemented by absolute fear, and Victor chipped away at that foundation publicly. She softly asks if he is refusing to stop. His jaw tightens as he corrects her. He simply cannot stop. A suffocating silence falls between them. Outside the glass, pedestrians hurry past, utterly blind to the apex predator resting inches away. The lesson hidden in this darkness is stark. Respect can be cultivated, but fear must be maintained. Carelessly shattering the fragile ego of a powerful man invites complete devastation. Stick with me, because this is where the dynamic shifts. Elena meets the gaze of a criminal kingpin and establishes a firm boundary. She extracts a vow that no physical harm will come to Victor. The syndicate can incinerate his finances, but there will be no blood. Roman searches her expression, suspecting a lingering affection for the man who ruined them both. She dismantles that assumption immediately. She simply refuses to let the stain of violence rot her own soul. Impressed by her moral absolute, Roman accepts the terms of economic ruin. Preserving your own humanity here. Preserving your own humanity will always matter more than the shallow satisfaction of revenge. Taking a measured sip of his coffee, he asks how she is coping. She confesses she is drowning, haunted by mornings of cruel amnesia. She describes the daily agony of remembering the betrayal, comparing it being pulled under freezing water. Roman nods, his stoicism masking a deep empathy. He offers a bleak but honest philosophy. The grief never actually shrinks. You simply grow strong around it, becoming better at maintaining the facade. A fragile smile breaks across her face as she notes his lack of comforting tact. The silence that follows is no longer tense. They sit not as adversaries, but as two solitary survivors of the very same emotional wreckage. Gathering her courage, she asked why he stepped in to save her at the gala. He studies his cup, admitting that he recognized a reflection of his own endurance in her eyes. It is a profound realization. Trauma, despite its cruelty, often functions as a brutal forge that shapes our deepest hidden strengths. Roman delivers a strike observation about human frailty. He points out that most victims of such profound deception collapse entirely, degrading them by begging a hollow partner to stay. Instead, she chose exile. Elena softly admits she felt shattered, devoid of any real bravery, but he reframes her narrative entirely. Courage, he insists, is not a shield against suffering. It is the agonizing act of walking away when every instinct screams at you to salvage the ashes. You and I have probably struggled with this concept. As the hour bleeds away, the mob boss reveals the cracks in his own foundation. He speaks of Serafina, admitting he saw her greed a decade ago, but chose to be blind to it. It is a quiet tragedy. Willfully ignoring the fatal flaws in the beginning guarantees you will pay the ultimate price at the end. Matching his vulnerability, Elena dissects the anatomy of her ruined marriage. She recounts the early warmth, analyzing how the emotional chasm widened so incrementally. that they became two ghosts haunting the same house. When they finally step out of the cafe, the atmosphere has mutated into something rare. They are bound by a strange allegiance, two individuals determined not to let betrayal define their existence. He escorts her to her vehicle, offering his protection with quiet sincerity. She returns the sentiment, watching the fearsome kingpin dissolve into the evening shadows. Sitting in the silence of her car, processing the absurdity of finding comfort in a criminal, her phone suddenly illuminates the dark. A message from Victor. We learn here that finding solidarity in unexpected places is a vital anchor in the long process of healing. The screen glows with Victor's for salvation. His message is a pathetic plea for salvation, lamenting his sudden collapse and begging for a lifeline. She studies the words with clinical detachment. A mere month ago, this manipulation would have pulled her under. Tonight, she simply erases his existence and drives into the night. Safe in her room, the syndicate leader's philosophy anchors her thoughts. Walking away is the ultimate act of bravery. For the first time since the fracture, she falls into a dreamless sleep. The psychology here is beautiful. Severing ties with a parasite is the only way the mind regains its sanctuary. Conversely, Victor is experiencing the brutal velocity of consequence. His company enters immediate bankruptcy. His sprawling estate falls to foreclosure. The superficial allies he bought with sheer arrogance vanish into thin air. The walls of isolation close rapidly around Victor. He dials the woman who ruined his marriage, only to find a deadline. He grovels to former colleagues for a way to reach his wife, and is met with silent contempt. This is the architectural flaw of a life built on deceit. It crumbles at the slightest pressure. High above the city, Roman nurses a dark spirit, observing the systemic dismantling of his enemy with surgical precision. There is no joy in his gaze. Only the grim satisfaction of a universal law upheld. Betrayal guarantees an unmarked grave. But this narrative holds a final, dangerous card. A desperate man stripped of his dignity becomes incredibly unpredictable. Scouring through the ashes of his firm, Victor uncovers classified digital footprints linking Roman to an underworld ledger. He possesses the exact poison required to burn an empire down. Picture the grim cinematic contrast here. Victor is suffocating in the stagnant air of a roadside motel, clutching a stolen dossier pulled from a compromised legal server. The pages contain undeniable evidence of money laundering and violent syndication. He stares at the ink with the feral hope of a condemned man. His fractured ego convinces him that this is his path to redemption. By slaying the dragon, he foolishly believes he can reclaim his kingdom. A single call to a federal prosecutor would light the match. But you and I both know the fatal flaw in his reasoning. Arrogant men rarely survive the infernos they start. Driven by pure spite, he reaches for his phone, his hands trembling violently under the weight of his own hubris. He is crossing the ultimate threshold. From this second onward, the story leaves the boardroom and descends into pure, unrestrained chaos. Just one phone call. That is the fragile thread hanging between Roman's untouchable empire, with a massive federal takedown and a decades pine bars. Victor sits in a cheap motel, his finger trembling over the dial button. Outside, the rain is coming down hard. A broken neon sign flashes red and blue, casting bruised shadows across the stolen mafia documents scattered on his bed. Victor actually believes this paper trail is his ticket to freedom, but desperation does this to a person. It creates a tunnel vision, the blind junior line top and your right in your one bot. He finally presses the button. His pulse is hammering in his ears. 1 ring, 2 rings. On the third, a government agent picks up. The operator asks how to direct the call. Victor opens his mouth, but the motor suddenly caves inward with a deafening crash. He screams, drops the receiver, and scrambles against the wall. 2 massive men in sharp black suits step through the splintered frame, moving with cold precision. Right behind them is Roman. He steps into the cheap room like he holds the deed to the building. His gray eyes process everything instantly. The files. The connected phone. Roman smooth bends down, lifts the receiver and speaks with a single tremor in his voice. "Wrong number," he says calmly. It is a terrifying reminder of a simple truth. The truly dangerous people in this world never actually need to raise their voices to command the room. Roman places the phone back on its cradle. His enforcers stand by the broken door, silent and unmoving. They do not even draw their guns, but the sheer weight of their presence fills the room with dread. Victor knows he is trapped. Roman slowly walks over to the bed, glancing down at his own criminal records. "You broke into my attorney's office," he says, and he almost sounds impressed. Victor practically melts against the wall. stammering some excuse about a divorce settlement. Roman cuts him off. He repeats, "You stole from my lawyer." He repeats, his voice perfectly level. Some makes it infinitely worse. Trying to outsmart someone who has spent a lifetime mastering the game is a quick way to lose everything. Stepping out of your lane usually leads straight off a cliff. Roman stares into Victor's panicked eyes and asks if he was seriously about to call the feds. Victor can barely breathe, whining that he just wants his normal life back. Roman slowly repeats the phrase, "The life you ruined by sleeping with my wife?" Victor tries to argue that Roman struck first by destroying his company, but Roman dismantles that argument with cold logic. "I took your business because you disrespected me," he explains. "But this," he points at the files, "this is you trying to put me in a cage. That is no longer a dispute. That is declaration of war. If we can learn anything here, it is this. Never pick a war unless you are entirely prepared for the heavy artillery the other person will inevitably bring to your front door. Let us look at this piece by piece, shall we?" Roman takes one slow step forward. He tells Victor that the only reason his heart is still beating is because of a sacred promise. He swore to Elena he would not lay a hand on him. Hearing her name, Victor sags in absolute relief, thinking he is safe. But Roman is a master of loopholes. "She asked me not to hurt you," he says softly. "She did not mention what I should do if you try to ruin my life." With a tiny nod, Roman signals his man, who sweeps the files into a briefcase. Victor panics, lying about having hidden digital backups. Roman shuts him down immediately. His crew already hacked the cloud and wiped every device Victor owns. Honesty is usually your safest bet, especially when cornered by someone holding all the winning cards. Roman looks down at this broken man and mentions that Victor is nowhere near as clever as he believes. The enforcer walks out, leaving the room heavy with silence. Roman pulls up a cheap chair and sits down, projecting the calm of a man who controls time itself. He delivers the final terms. "He will return." When Victor tries to protest, Roman's voice is ice cold. "When Victor tries to again, or if he again, he warns. Or if you think about contacting Elena, that promise I made completely vanishes. Do you understand?" Victor nods frantically, stripped of his pride. Roman stands up. "Sometimes, when a terrifying force offers you a narrow escape hatch, the smartest thing you can, is take it, and never look back." Pausing at the door, Roman delivers one final psychological blow. He tells Victor that losing his business was merely the opening act. The true punishment begins tomorrow. For the rest of his life, Victor will drown in paranoia, constantly checking his rearview mirror, wondering if Roman has finally sent a crew. Roman adjusts his cuffs and states a chilling fact: that endless fear is the real price of betrayal. Not a quick end, but a slow decay of the mind. Then he steps out into the rain. Victor is left alone in the dark, completely paralyzed. His phone vibrates on the mattress, but he cannot even move his hand. Our actions always carry a heavy tax. And the debt of betraying the wrong person is a painful burden you will end up carrying for the rest of your days. By the time the morning sun broke over the skyline, Victor had packed his life into his car and fled the city for good. Meanwhile, Elena slow realizing that escaping a toxic marriage is only the first step of healing. She rented a tiny bare bones apartment, but the air inside belonged entirely to her. She spent her mornings hunting for jobs, and her evenings reading in quiet solitude. True peace of mind will always be worth more than a mansion built on constant lies. Her life was finally starting to feel stable, but the past rarely lets you go that easily. In the dead of night, her screen lights up the dark room. It is Roman Castelli. Taking a deep, shaky breath, Elena actually decides to answer the call. "Hello, Elena," he says. His voice sounds incredibly rough, stripped its usual control. She immediately asks if he is all right. Silence stretches over the line for a heavy moment. Then Roman drops the news. "Your husband left the city," he murmurs, "and he is never coming back." Elena feels the floor drop out from under her. Half of her soul sighs in massive relief, knowing Victor is gone, but the other half freezes in terror. "What did you do him?" she demands. Roman downplays it, claiming he just had a firm conversation after catching Victor stealing sensitive files from his lawyer. Playing games with dangerous people is a surefire way to burn your own house down. Always understand the size of the fire before you strike the match. You and I might be wondering the same thing she is. How far did Roman go? He tells her he simply took his paper locate. "I kept my promise to you," he says quietly. "I did not harm him." Elena closes her eyes. Reeling, he managed to absolutely terrify her ex without leaving a single bruise. She whispers a small thank you, but then the heavy atmosphere shifts. Roman's tone softens into something incredibly vulnerable. He mentions his own divorce is wrapping up, and he just wants to see her again, not for syndicate business, just to share a cup of coffee. It proves a profound point about human nature. Even the most guarded people on the planet eventually crave a normal connection where they do not have to wear their heavy armor. You are one of the only people who looks at me. Elena stares blankly at the shadows on her walls. Getting involved with a crime boss, even over a harmless lat, means stepping back into chaotic world she just escaped. But there is a bitter truth we all have to swallow. Total isolation can slowly drain the life out of you, just as thoroughly as a bad relationship. Roman is the only person who truly understands the storm she survived. Just coffee, she tells him, setting a strict boundary. They agree to meet the following week. When the call ends, Elena sits alone in the heavy silence. She knows exactly what she is doing. She is walking right back toward the heat of the fire. Elena is fully aware she is crossing a massive red line. But she steps over it anyway, because sometimes finding your way forward means making the choices that absolutely terrify you. A week later, she walks into the local cafe to meet the king of the underworld. Roman looks entirely different in the daylight. The lethal edge is gone, replaced by deep exhaustion. They sit together, chatting about safe, mundane things like old books and travel, carefully avoiding their own trauma. But the real world never waits for long. Roman's phone suddenly buzzes. He glances at the screen, and the humanity drains from his face. He steps outside, detained from his care, replaced by cold call. The lesson here is unavoidable. You can try to hide in a quiet moment, but you can never truly put reality on pause. You and I can both see it coming. We watch the precise moment the illusion fractures. Roman's posture tightens into the aggressive stance of a predator in half a second. When he returns from his phone call, his face has hardened into an unreadable mask. "I have to go," he states, his voice stripped of all warmth. Then he drops a revelation that shatters the room. Serafina is dead. The words strike Elena with the devastating force of a freight train. Roman calmly details a tragic car accident on a slick, rain-soaked road. The authorities claim it was a mere tragedy, but his tone is utterly brack. Elena feels a sudden, profound nausea. "You do not believe it was an accident," she whispers. The profound lesson here is quite simple. In the dark corridors of absolute power, there are no true coincidences. Roman offers no comfort, turning his back and walking away. He is already rushing out the door before the gravity of the moment fully settles. Elena is left utterly abandoned at the small table, staring at a coffee that has turned ice cold. Her mind races, desperately trying to process the psychological weight of this twist. Serafina, the very woman who destroyed Elena's marriage, is suddenly gone just days before her divorce was finalized. Elena looks down to see her own hands trembling uncontrollably. She tries to build a fragile wall of denial, forcing herself to accept it as a tragic stroke of fate. But the simple life lesson is that your intuition rarely lies to you. The utter lifelessness in Roman's eyes tells her he anticipated this exact outcome. She walks home enveloped in a suffocating mental fog. By the time darkness falls, the television broadcasts are relentlessly flashing images of the mangled steel wreckage. The evening broadcasts are desperate, trying to sell the narrative of a simple tragedy. They point to the slick asphalt and excessive speed, wrapping a neat bow around the destruction. Yet, Elena watched the glowing screen with absolutely terror inching down her spine. Suddenly her phone vibrates. A text from Roman lights to meet the next day. Elena stares at the device as if it might strike her. Instead of surrendering to him, she immediately dials Caroline, her utter ruthless divorce attorney. "I need the unvarnished truth," Elena demands. She asks about the dark, violent whispers surrounding Roman Castelli. The lawyer goes completely silent. Elena sharply notes that the man's wife just perished on national television. A vital lesson to remember is this: when the people you pay to speak go dead silent, you are stepping onto a buried landmine. Caroline delivers a warning so chilling, it seems to lower the temperature in the room. She instructs Elena to stop unearthing secrets that will only drag her into the abyss. When Elena attempts to argue, the line abruptly goes dead. Elena remains frozen in her living room, paralyzed by the sheer weight of reality. Every primal survival instinct demands that she erase Roman Castelli from her life, pack a bag, and flee before she becomes another ghost in his violent narrative. Yet, a fragile part of her mind rebels. She remembers the quiet intellectual who shared her coffee. The profound life lesson here is that a true monster can still possess the capacity for profound gentleness. With a wave of suffocating horror, Elena realizes she has been gazing at a reflection, totally blind to the ruthless predator standing directly behind the glass. Elena has only interacted with the curated version of Roman. She knows the thoughtful scholar who dissects classic literature, not the apex predator who rules a sprawling underworld. She can't fathom the ruthless crime boss who makes enemies vanish into the soil. Her phone suddenly illuminates with another message. "I know what you are thinking," the text reads. Elena stares at those words until they blur. Then she makes the most reckless instinctual leap of her entire life. She dials his number. And he answers instantly. Elena does not offer pleasantries. "Did you kill her?" she asks, her voice trembling like a fragile wire in the wind. A heavy silence falls over the connection. She pushes harder, demanding the ugly truth. The life lesson here is to always drag your deepest fears into the light. Roman finally answers with a flat, emotionless denial. "I do not believe you," Elena fires back, her voice desperate to shatter his absolute composure. Roman remains infuriatingly calm. "I do not care if you believe me," he replies, "but I am telling you the objective truth. I did not kill my wife." Elena demands to know why the entire city assumes he orchestrated her demise. Roman coldly explains that society trades dark expectations onto man in his position. Overwhelmed by the sheer absurdity of it all, Elena begins to weep. She tells him she cannot survive in this chaotic theater of violence. Roman attempts to minimize their connection, suggesting they merely shared a few innocent coffees. But Elena refuses to hide behind pleasant lies. They both feel the profound gravity pulling them together. The lesson here? Never deceive yourself about your own feelings. Roman finally yields, and Elena demands they sever all ties immediately. "Let us dissect this exchange together, because it is a masterclass in psychogalactic terror. If that is what you want, I will respect it," he says. But before the line goes dead, he delivers a chilling truth. "I did not kill Serafina," he murmurs. "But if I had, it would not have been a messy car crash. It would have been utterly clean, and she would simply cease to exist." Elena feels a sudden winter in her veins. She asks if this graphic confession is meant to comfort her. Roman calmly replies that it is not. He merely wants her to understand the vast canyon between his capacity for darkness and his actual choices. The simple life lesson is that raw, unfiltered honesty is often the most terrifying thing a person can offer. Elena whispers a fragile goodbye, hangs up the phone, and completely breaks down in tears. As the sun rises, the narrative abruptly shifts. The local media uncovers footage showing Serafina aggressively tearing through the rain-slicked streets with reckless abandon. The toxicology reports follow shortly after, painting a grim picture. Her system was completely flooded with alcohol. Authorities quickly closed the book, ruling the tragedy a fatal result of drunk driving, totally devoid of foul play. Elena scans the digital articles with trembling hands. There was no grand conspiracy or phantom assassins. It was just a deeply flawed woman whose own destructive choices finally caught up with her. The vital life lesson here is that your own unhealed demons will destroy you faster than any external enemy. Elena expects to feel a wave of relief, but she is only left with a hollow ache. Roman may be innocent of this specific crime, but he remains a man perfectly built for absolute violence. Rome remains the exact same calculating Titan, who dismantled her ex-husband's existence without breaking a sweat. He inhabits a chilling world of organized violence. Yet, for an irrational moment, Elena had actually entertained the thought of letting him in. She spends an agonizing week declining his calls and deleting his messages, desperately clinging to her logical choice. But when her apartment grows quiet, her mind betrays her. She recalled the tense weight of his gaze. He never looked at her with pity or saw a shattered victim. He looked at her as a true survivor. The profound life lesson is that sometimes the most dangerous people in the room are the only ones who recognize your hidden strength. Exactly 14 days after the funeral, the silence is shattered by the sharp ring of her doorbell. The narrative is far from over. Stick with me here, because this is where the architecture of the betrayal is fully exposed. Elena peers through her peephole, and her pulse flatlines. Roman stands in the dim light of the hallway, clutching a thick envelope. She cracks the heavy door just a few inches, establishing a physical boundary. Roman slides the package through the narrow gap, insisting she review the contents before the public narrative takes over. As Elena unfolds the financial documents, her reality shatters. Serafina had not merely been unfaithful. For 2 entire years, she had been systematically siphoning funds from Roman's hidden accounts, successfully stealing $3 million. The crucial life lesson? Keep your inner circle incredibly small, because the people standing closest to your heart are the ones positioned to inflict the deepest wounds. Elena traces the ink on the ledgers, struggling to process the sheer scale of the deception. Roman stands silently, lowering the temperature of the room to freezing. He reveals that the betrayal was infinitely more toxic than a simple romantic affair. Serafina and Victor had orchestrated an elaborate scheme to launder the stolen wealth and vanish into a new life together. The floor tilts beneath Elena's feet as she asks the heartbreaking question. Was Victor fully aware of the financial theft? Roman nods, his expression a haunting mixture of sorrow and emotional detachment. The puzzle pieces instantly snap together. Roman possessed this devastating knowledge 3 full days before their explosive public confrontation. The essential life lesson: when a powerful individual goes completely quiet after a severe betrayal, you must run. The hurricane has already arrived. This is the exact moment Roman reveals the depth of his tactical genius. He explains that he required undeniable proof before executing his counteroffensive. He intentionally allowed the betrayers to believe their grand illusion was succeeding, treating them like pawns on a dark chessboard. The public confrontation was not a loss of control, but a calculated message of absolute dominance. Why bring these documents to Elena? He needs her to shed her final illusions. Victor did not simply stumble into an affair. He meticulously plotted to drain an empire and disappear. Roman wants her to understand that dismantling Victor's livelihood was not petty vengeance, but a necessary execution of justice. Elena's last remaining hope shatters. The vital life lesson we must all accept. Never frame a toxic partner's calculated disrespect as a mere moment of weakness. People know exactly what they are doing to you. The truth strikes Elena with the weight of a collapsing building. Her husband was willing to sacrifice her for stolen money and a hollow affair. She turns to Roman, piercing the silence, to ask if Serafina knew the game was over. Darkens in a profound abyss. He confesses confronting his wife just a day before her fatal crash. Astonishingly, she mocked him, promising to strip his empire to the bone in court. Half a day later, she was dead. Roman holds Elena's gaze, swearing his hands are clean, yet he fiercely refuses to feign grief. You and I can recognize a dark authenticity in that cold confession. The lesson here is simple. Karma often moves swiftest against those who arrogantly mock the destruction they cause. Roman lays bare the brutal mechanics of their reality. Serafina tried to dismantle him. Victor played the pawn, and the universe simply balanced the scales. Pressing the elevator button, he offers Elena the freedom to judge his darkness before he retreats. She holds up the damning documents, asking why he revealed this. Roman falls silent, his hardened facade fracturing. He admits she is the only person who ever looked at him and saw a soul worth saving. He needs her to see that even monsters possess a twisted integrity. The door slides shut, leaving Elena alone with the evidence of her shattered marriage. The lesson here is striking. Sometimes the acknowledged villain offers you raw honesty, while the supposed good guy quietly robs you blind. Elena stunk a paradigm shift. Serafina was never merely a mistress. She was a calculated parasite. And Roman transcends the caricature of a cold-blooded villain. He is a paradoxical force of nature, shielding his inner circle with the lethal energy he uses to obliterate rivals. The heavy thud of her apartment door mirrors the finality in her mind. Instead of running, she makes a dangerously bold move. She calls the syndicate leader back. He answers on the first ring. Elena strips away the pleasantries and demands the unfiltered truth, forbidding him from shielding her from the ugliness of his world. It reveals a powerful life lesson. If you ever decide to swim with apex predators, you must demand to know exactly how deep the dark water truly goes. A heavy silence of the line, Roman hesitates, unsettled by her willingness to step into the abyss, and asks if she is certain. Elena strips away all pretense. She admits she is terrified, yet chooses to leap in the dark regardless. They agree to meet at their usual cafe the following dawn to dismantle their secrets. Disconnecting, Elena sinks into her sofa, surrounded by the physical debris of a criminal conspiracy. Outside, the city lights splinter against the glass, like fractured diamonds. She has stopped being a passive observer in her own tragedy, and is finally stepping into her power. The life lesson for you and me is deeply resonant. Running from a terrifying truth will only drain your spirit, but turning to confront the fire will ultimately burn away your chains. Elena is awakening to a profound realization. Mere survival is a hollow victory. True resurrection requires forging a new identity from the scorched earth of your past. She arrives at the cafe early. A tremor overtakes her hands, forcing to bury them in her pockets, masking the terror of crossing into shadow economy. A gray overcast blankets the morning, mirroring the moral ambiguity of her choice. Precisely at 9, a dark sedan glides toe the pavement. As Roman emerges, the mythical aura of the syndicate boss dissolves. He does not radiate danger today. He merely looks profoundly weary, carrying the weight of his empire. The life lesson here is undeniable. The most agonizing battles we endure often begin the very second we refuse to play the victim. The untouchable kingpin looks surprisingly fragile. Deep shadows bruise the skin beneath his eyes. Yet, the moment his gaze locks onto Elena, the hardened armor of his criminal persona fractures. He quietly expresses gratitude that she came. Rendered mute by her racing pulse, Elena offers a single nod. They drift into the quiet gloom of the cafe, instinctively seeking a secluded table wrapped in shadows. Gathering a fragile thread of courage, Elena commands him to strip away every remaining lie. 2 coffees arrive, mere props in this high-stakes negotiation, destined to turn cold. Roman sinks into his chair, studying her as if she is the solitary beacon of truth in his fraudulent world. The lesson is vital. Pay close attention to the person who willingly drops their armor when you enter the room. Roman asks where this confession should begin, and Elena demands the genesis of his darkness. Drawing a heavy breath, he exhumes the dust of his past. He describes an unforgiving neighborhood where morality was a fatal weakness. His father was ground into an early grave by 47 through relentless labor, while his mother scrubbed floors until her skin bled. Roman watched the legitimate world devour his honest parents, and in response, he forged a dark rebellion. He embraced the shadows, accepting illicit jobs reward silence with currencies. By his mid-20s, that hustle had mutated into a sprawling syndicate. This reveals a tragic life lesson. Often, the most dangerous figures in society are simply wounded children who realized early on that the rules were completely rigged against them. Roman locks eyes with her, penetrate past her defenses. He outlined the dual nature of his empire. On paper, his corporations are pristine. Beneath the surface lies a labyrinth of corruption. He washes illicit wealth through real estate, deploys brute force for those outside the law, and brokers secrets to keep the elite leashed. Elena absorbs this, looks him dead in the eye, and calls him a criminal. Roman does not flinch. He simply agrees. No justifications, no romanticizing his sins. When she questions this honesty, he states that if she remains in orbit, she must do so with eyes wide open. You and I can take away a profound life lesson here. When a person reveals their darkest shadows with a single excuse, believe them immediately. That brutal transparency is a rare currency. The atmosphere grows heavy as Elena asks the most dangerous question. Did he orchestrate his wife's demise? Roman's jaw tightens before delivering a cold admission. He did not order the crash, but freely admits he would have killed her himself had she lived to dismantle his empire. The chilling velocity of that truth strikes Elena with physical force. He acknowledges that a random tragedy is the only thing that prevented him from becoming her killer. He asks quietly if that makes him a monster, fully surrendering to his darkness. Every biological instinct in Elena is screaming at her to flee this predator. Yet it highlights a fascinating life lesson. Occasionally, a truth is so horrifying that it paradoxically commands your respect, even as every nerve demands you run. Attempting to decode why a syndicate leader values her judgment, Roman appears utterly disarmed. He confesses she is the first person in a decade to address him as a human rather than a weapon. To the underworld, he is an untouchable monument of fear, but Elena reckons the man who bleeds from the same wounds of betrayal. Standing him that she in her ground, she reminds him that shared grief does not wash the blood from his ledger. Roman bows his head in agreement, testing her agency. She asks if she can walk away right now without consequence. He solemnly swears she can leave, entirely untouched. The life lesson echoes loudly here. True power is never about chaining people to your side. It is about handing them the keys to the cage, and hoping they choose to stay anyway. The gravity shifts as Roman delivers a chilling ultimatum. Leaning across the table, he warns that his reality offers no emergency exits. If she aligns with rival factions will instantly paint a target on her back. They will hunt her and ruthlessly exploit her. As a vulnerability, he is begging her to weigh the fatal cost of this association. A tremor runs through Elena, but her memory drifts back to the suffocating prison of her marriage. She recalls the life she was forced to play, drown under pleasant fictions. Let's look at piece by piece, shall we? Elena embraces the forged steel of the woman she is rapidly becoming. The lesson here is pivotal. Sometimes, you must strike a match and burn down a comfortable, suffocating lie just to build a dangerous, yet profoundly honest truth. The tension between them is cinematic gold. Holding the gaze of a kingpin, Elena declares she is not romanticizing his underworld. She is simply finished deceiving hers. Roman tilts his head, perplexed. She acknowledges the danger he represents, yet refuses to flee. However, she establishes an immovable boundary. His illicit trade must never bleed into her reality. Total compartmentalization. Roman counters with the harsh mechanics of his world. He can build a fortress around her, but the public will view her as complicit by association. Unfazed, Elena states she will face the judgment of the world when the dawn breaks. This culminates in a brutal life lesson. You can construct the most rigid boundaries imaginable to protect your peace, but you can never control how society judges the shadows of the company you keep. Let us look closely at this moment together, because it is quietly profound. Roman, a man whose face is usually a locked vault, actually softens. He agrees to her terms, and for a single hour in a coffee shop, the heavy curtains of the mafia are drawn back. There is no talk of syndicates or betrayals, just quiet murmurs about childhood books and dreamed escapes. It is fascinating how the most mundane details can bridge the gap between two deeply broken people. By the time they step out, the air between them has irrevocably shifted. They are no longer strangers sharing a trauma. They are unknowingly assembling a ticking time bomb. Roman walks her to her car with the polished grace of a gentleman. It shows us a strange truth about human nature. Sometimes, discovering comfort in the exact person who brings the most danger feels terrifyingly like coming home. When Roman asks to see her again, holds his gaze and delivers a firm yes. A shadow of a smile actually breaks across his face as they lock in a date for the following week. Later, gripping the steering wheel as she watches his reflection fade in her rearview mirror, her hands tremble. It is not fear shaking her bones, but the electric realization that she has willingly stepped into the dark without a lantern. Over the next 3 weeks, a strange normalcy settles in: coffee on Tuesdays, dinner on Fridays. They waltz delicately around his criminal reality, ignoring the sharp edges of his world lingering just out of sight. It is a brilliant display of psychological denial. Turning a blind eye to the screaming red flags in our lives never actually erases the danger. It only guarantees that the inevitable collision will destroy us completely. Naturally, the whispers begin to spread. Maya calls Elena in an absolute panic, terrified by the rumors the streets are talking, painting Elena as a wee, hating Elena as a fool dating a monster, predicting she will end up just as dead as Serafina. That specific name hits Elena like a fizzle blow to the chest. She tries desperately to play it cool, insisting they are merely friends, but Maya delivers a brutal reality check. Men who run criminal empires do not have friends. They only manage assets and eliminate liabilities. Elena desperately argues that Roman is different, armed with absolute zero evidence to back it up. Her friend is watching her walk off a cliff. We all need someone like Maya in our corner. True friends are the ones willing to drag your toxic choices into the light, risking the friendship to keep you alive and grounded. Let us pause and really unpack Elena's logic here, because it is a classic study in self-destruction. Sitting alone in her quiet apartment, she admits she is playing with fire, yet walking away feels physically impossible. She is not in love with him, but he is the only person who looks at her shattered pieces without asking her to smile. Then, the phone buzzes. Roman wants dinner the next night, because they need to talk a phrase that universally signals incoming chaos. Her stomach plummets as she types back, asking if everything is okay. It is a sharp, sobering moment of clarity for anyone watching. Trauma bonding might mimic the warmth of genuine connection, but building a foundation entirely on shared darkness and unspoken secrets is just setting the stage for a spectacular and unavoidable collapse. He confirms everything is fine, but insists they must speak face to face, promising to send a car at 7 sharp. Elena tosses her phone aside, fighting a rising panic over what this conversation might unleash. The following evening, a heavy black sedan pulls up right on the dot. She climbs into the back, met only by the absolute silence of a stone-faced driver. 20 tense minutes later, they arrive at an impossibly exclusive restaurant, the kind with no name on the door, built solely for the untouchable elite. There stands Roman in a perfectly tailored suit, wearing his authority like a loaded weapon. The imagery here is impossible to ignore. When your evening out requires a silent chauffeur and a hidden entrance, you are no longer an innocent bystander. You are an active player in a dangerous game. He thanks her for coming, guiding her into a dining room that feels like a cinematic masterpiece. The lights are turned low, cellos weep in the background, and the atmosphere practically hums with unspoken threats. The moment the door to their private room clicks shut, Elena demands the truth. Roman tells her to sit, yet he remains standing, his usual eye composure melting into visible sweat. Taking a ragged breath, he shatters their fragile illusion. 3 days ago, a rival crew tried to end his life. 4 bullets tore through the air outside his office in a brazen daylight strike. It is a stark destruction of the myth of absolute power, no matter how high you climb or how thick the walls of your empire are. The brutal consequence of a violent life will always kick down the door to collect what is owed. Roman explains that while he survived the ambush, his most trusted lieutenant took a bullet. His face resembles carved marble, but the tremor in his voice betrays a deeply rattled man. The shooters belong to Serafina's family, launching a blood-soaked vendetta that will not end until coffins are lowered. Elena grips the edge of the mahogany table, her knuckles turning white as she reminds him he swore her death was an accident. He insists it was. But grief does not listen to reason, it only demands blood. Sinking heavily into his chair, he delivers the crushing blow. Because of the target on his back, anyone breathing near him is marked for death. Elena is now in the crosshairs. It highlights a painful reality of human connection. Our most toxic choices rarely destroy just us. They pull everyone we cherish right in the blast radius. Then he drops a confession that makes the room feel completely airless. For weeks, he has had a shadow detail tracking her every move, watching her apartment, invading her quiet life under the guise of protection. He justifies it by saying security only holds up if she remains predictable. Suffocating under the weight of it all, Elena listens to her only 2 options. She can walk away forever, severing the tie completely so the underworld knows she is off the board. Or she stays, trading her independence for heavy bodyguards and the constant, cold dread of an assassin. When she asks if this is truly it, his heavy silence is all the confirmation she needs. She chokes back her tears. It is a sobering lesson on independence. True freedom is quietly priceless, and surrendering it for someone else's chaos means giving up the pen to your own story. Stick with me here, because the emotional weight of this scene is incredible. Elena finally shatters, demanding to know why he withheld this nightmare 3 weeks ago, back before her heart got so tangled up in his. She nearly confesses the depth of her feelings, catching the words right against her teeth. When she furiously asked why he does not just keep protecting her in secret, Roman looks at her like she is the only light left in his dark world. He tells her she deserves the brutal truth, that he cares entirely too much to trap her in his violent cage without giving her the keys. That confession strikes Elena right in the chest. She jumps up and practically sprints for the exit. And importantly, Roman does not run after her. Authentic care is never about chaining someone to your side. It is about offering an open door when the fire gets too hot. Bursting out onto the cold street, Elena is swallowed by a violent panic attack. Her lungs refuse to expand, the neon city lights blurring as she collapses against the brick wall, just as she had finally started stitching her life back together. Finding warmth instead of trauma, she is handed a truly impossible ultimatum: save her own life, or keep her found connection with Roman. The heavy restaurant door swings open, and Roman steps into the alley, keeping a respectful distance. He quietly apologizes for dragging her into his personal war zone, but Elena wipes her face and strips away the victim narrative. She fires back that he did not drag her. She walked in the fire on her own 2 feet. This is a brilliant flash of character evolution. Taking full accountability for our darkest choices is the ultimate sign of growth, even when it burns. They stand frozen under the streetlights, wrapped in a thick, punning silence. When Elena finally speaks, she demands time to process the wreckage. Roman tells her to take all the time she needs, but her street smarts have already kicked in. She demands to know how long the hitmen actually show up. His expression darkens into a grim mask as he confesses she has 48 hours before the rival syndicate connects the dots. The clock is officially ticking. Roman steps closer, vowing to respect her choice, offering a fund escape she runs or a life of war if she stays. But before he can finish painting the grim picture, Elena cuts him off, locking onto his gray eyes with a sudden fierce clarity. When life slides a ticking clock across the table, hiding is no longer an option. You simply have to look the absolute worst-case scenario directly in the eye. Roman delivers his vow with the quiet gravity of a king defending his borders. He swears to protect her, decreeing that any hand raised against her will spark an all. Outwar, by all logic, this dark promise should send her running. Yet, in a profound psychological paradox, his declaration wraps around her like a blanket. For the next 48 hours, Elena is a prisoner of her own mind. Pacing the floorboard is in a war of identity. Running and vanishing into the woodwork is the easy, expected move. But here is the agonizing revelation. She has spent her entire existence fleeing from shadows. We often learn this the hard way. The truest danger is rarely the monster hunting you in the dark, but the paralyzing fear that keeps you from actually living. Let us examine this shift together. Here is immense. Elena finally here is immense. She has been dodging the ugly truth of her marriage, constantly shrinking to fit into rooms far too small for her. She dials Roman. When she tells him she is staying, the line goes dead. Bright, the line goes she is certain. With raw honesty, she admits she is terrified, but refuses to retreat. For the first time, someone recognizes she is strong enough to survive the brutal underworld. Roman warns her of the steep cost, and she counters that nothing real comes cheap. Life constantly reminds us to stop retreating in the comfort of a cage, and instead step out in the storm to claim our own inherent power. Roman does not offer a choice. He informs her that security is en route, and she will be moving in his heavily fortified estate. Remains in his orbit. If she remains in his orbit, she submits to his absolute protection. Internally, panic claws at Elena's chest. Yet her voice remains steady as she simply agrees. Roman leaves her with a heavy warning, urging her not to make him regret this leap of faith. With the hour, the doorbell rings. Two massive figures in sharp suits loom in her hallway, pulling her reality entirely off its axis. She is leaving the mundane world behind. We quickly realize that dipping a toe in the water achieves nothing. Sometimes, hurling yours into the deep end is the only way to finally learn how to swim. The guards are monuments of silence, utterly professional and quietly terrifying. With a single bag in hand, Elena follows them into the heavy darkness of a waiting sedan. They carve through the sleeping city, arriving at Roman's impenetrable stronghold. It is a modern fortress of glass and steel, where the doormen see everything and say absolutely nothing. She is escorted straight to the 20th floor. As the elevator doors part, Roman is waiting. He takes in the sight of her meager belongings, and the hard edges of his demeanor instantly soften. He does not boast, he simply thanks her for arriving. There is a quiet truth hidden in this exchange. Showing up when the stakes are highest is the purest, most undeniable proof of loyalty a person can offer. Rather than letting her rest in the guest room, Roman abruptly changes course. He leads her into the nerve center of his operation, a private office glowing with endless security feeds. He pulls up footage from 3 days prior, revealing the chilling image of a dark car and faceless men photographing Elena's home. The reality is stark. These predators have been hunting her since Serafina passed, desperate to discover if Elena is the chink in Roman's armor. Now, the enemy has their answer. The weight of this revelation crashed down on her, stealing the air from the room. It exposes a deeply human flaw that none of us can escape. The people we hold close will forever be our greatest vulnerability, yet they remain the sole reason we fight at all. When Elena asks about his next move, the warmth leaves Roman's eyes completely. His voice drops in a chilling, absolute register. He intends to send a message written in blood. Even looking in her direction guarantees an immediate death sentence. A rational mind would flee from such violent devotion, yet it leaves Elena feeling entirely untouchable. She is anchored by a twisted sense of value, asking of her the chance to look away, asking if she truly wants the dark details. She does not blink. She embraces the impending chaos. He reveals the faces of 3 men who plotted his downfall. It is a grim awakening, reminding us all of a difficult fact. Confronting an ugly, brutal reality is always better than suffering blindly inside a beautiful lie. Roman breaks down the hierarchy. These targets are tied to the uncle of Serafina, operating under the arrogant assumption that their bloodline grants them total immunity. With cold precision, he states that tomorrow night will violently correct that illusion. Elena can feel her pulse hammering against her ribs as she asks exactly what he plans to do. He holds her gaze, vowing to remind the entire underworld exactly why his name commands fear. It is a masterclass in psychological warfare. Any other person would recoil, yet Elena simply asks him to be careful. Her raw, unpolished empathy catches the crime boss completely off guard. It is a stunning display of human connection. A single drop of genuine care can pierce through the thickest emotional armor imaginable. He promises to return safely, leaving her alone in the sprawling guest suite to digest her new reality. Elena has crossed an invisible threshold into a criminal ecosystem, a space from which she can never retreat. She has actively chosen this dark path, accepting the violence, the ever-present danger, and the brutal toll of survival. Hours later, she jolts awake to a suffocating silence. It is not the quiet of a peaceful slumber, but the heavy, charged air preceding a violent storm. At nearly 4 a.m, the massive penthouse feels like a tomb. She drifts to the floor, to soiling glass, staring out at the oblivious city below. It forces a heavy reflection on the nature of consequence. Every decision carries a tax, and sometimes that tax is your peace of mind. You and I must pause here to understand the gravity of her weight. Imagine staring down at a glowing metropolis, painfully aware that somewhere in those shadowed streets, the man who swore to protect you is executing pure vengeance. Elena tries to steady her breathing, rationalizing that he has survived 1,000 nights just like this, yet her hands will not stop trembling. 4 agonizing hours bleed away before the elevator finally sounds. Roman emerges, flanked by his guards. His jacket is gone, his white shirt ruined by stark red stains, and fresh blood tracks down his jaw. But he is standing. Seeing her, he exhales her name, his rigid posture breaking. It highlights a painful truth. Waiting in the dark for someone you value is the most grueling task of all. Roman insists she should be resting, but she quickly dismisses the idea as impossible. With a subtle motion of his hand, he sends his heavy muscle away, leaving the two of them alone in the quiet aftermath. Elena focuses on the terrifying crimson blooming across his clothes, asking only if he is hurt. He waves away her concern with quiet detachment, noting that the blood is not his own. A typical response would be terror, but Elena is flooded with a profound, grounding relief simply because he survived. She asks if his brutal point was made. His features harden into stone, as he confirms the rival faction now understands the fatal cost of crossing them. It is a twisted paradox of the human condition. In the absence of light, the darkest shadows can offer unexpected comfort. Unwilling to retreat to her room, Elena follows him down the dim corridor. She demands the details of the night, driven not by idle curiosity, but by a desperate need to comprehend the machinery of his violent world. Roman stops, the adrenaline fading to reveal an exhausted, much older man. He explains without hesitation. 3 men tried to end his life, and tonight he dismantled their reality, but here is the psychology twist. He did not kill them. Instead, he shattered their sense of security. He proved that he knows the location of their beds, the source of their wealth, and the faces of their families. It is an intricate game of chess. Gathering knowledge is the ultimate weapon, and knowing the exact pressure point is infinitely more effective than a blind strike. He admits that he planted a terror so deep, it instantly severed their loyalty to their fallen leader. Hearing this chilling confession, Elena neither flinches nor turns away. Instead, she fully absorbs the grim mechanics of maintaining power in a criminal empire. Looking directly in his tired eyes, she softly thanks him for keeping her alive. Roman is genuinely taken aback. When he attempts to brush off the gratitude, she reaches forward, her fingers light grazing his bruised brow. He tenses yet remains completely still. Taking the lead, she guides this lethal crime lord to a kitchen stool and retrieves the first aid supplies. Life constantly reveals the softer side of hard men. Even those who rule through fear simply want a steady hand to patch their wounds. Let us examine the profound psychology at play here. She cleans the wound with methodical, steady hands, while Roman studies her face with intense scrutiny. He observes, almost in disbelief, that she is no longer afraid of him. Elena concedes that she probably should be running for the door, yet she understands the crucial distinction between a man who is a threat to the world and a man who is a threat to her. Roman challenges this logic, but she cuts him off. She reminds him that he honored his word regarding her ex and gave her the absolute freedom to leave when he could have held her captive. True trust does not require us to close our eyes to the danger. It is simply about knowing, with absolute certainty, exactly who is holding the weapon in the dark. Let us look closely at this moment, you and I. Elena finally shatters the illusion, telling Roman that while he is undoubtedly brutal, he is never needlessly cruel. In the underworld they inhabit, that distinction is the only currency that matters. They stand there, the silence in the kitchen heavy with unspoken truths. Roman, his voice thick with vulnerability he rarely shows, confesses that his affection for her is a dangerous liability. He urged her to flee before they are hopelessly entangled. Yet, Elena refuses to retreat. She's entirely finished with fleeing from fear, choosing the kincaid reality of him over a sterile, predictable existence. It reminds us that true safety is an illusion, and playing it safe rarely makes a great story or a meaningful life. Elena lays her emotional armor down completely, admitting she is entirely exhausted from fighting her own feelings. Roman attempts to rationalize her devotion, arguing she is merely intoxicated by a man who finally respects her power. But Elena dismisses this psychological defense. She suggests that perhaps the simplest truth is the real one. She just loves him. Roman closes his eyes against the inevitable, warning that tragedies are written for people exactly like them. She pulls him into a kiss anyway. There is no cinematic perfection here. It is desperate tasting of cold coffee and sheer survival, while Roman responds like a drowning man breaking the surface. We learn here that sometimes the most complicated love is the only kind capable of truly saving us. When they finally separate, the air between them feels entirely altered. Roman rests his forehead against hers, murmuring that this irreversible choice changes the very fabric of their reality. He offers no illusions of a peaceful future, only the promise of absolute chaos, unwavering protection, and his total devotion. Through her tears, Elena points out the deep irony of her life. This criminal kingpin is offering far more genuine security than her supposedly legitimate, yet entirely toxic, former husband ever could. Roman releases a rare, quiet laugh, drawing her back into a deliberate embrace as the gray dawn spills into the room. It is a profound reminder that even after our darkest, most violent chapters, the sun inevitably finds a way to rise. Let us step forward into the psychological aftermath of that night. As the adrenaline fades, leaving only profound exhaustion, Roman leads her to his room, and they collapse atop the heavy blankets, fully clothed. There is no grand romantic consummation here. Merely battery. Elena falls asleep against the chest of a ruthless syndicate leader, yet she finds a sanctuary she never knew in her lawful, supposedly secure marriage. When she wakes hours later, Roman is gone, leaving only a handwritten note and a detail of armed guards outside her door. Stepping in the shower, she accepts the terrifying truth of her attachment. It teaches us a strange paradox. Sometimes, true security is found in the places we were taught to fear the most. Just then, the outside world intrudes. Her phone vibrates relentlessly with messages from her best friend Maya, who is frantic with worry. Elena types a simple reply, confirming she is safe, before revealing she is with Roman. The digital silence falls as thick with unspoken panic. Finally, Maya asks the only two questions that truly matter. Are you safe and are you happy? Elena is forced to evaluate her entire paradigm. Happiness used to represent a pristine. Now it means embracing a jagged, unfiltered reality. It means being seen by a man who views her emotional scars as medals of honor, rather than flaws. She answers yes. The wisdom here is clear. Genuine happiness requires us to abandon comfortable lies and fiercely own our truth. Maya takes 5 agonizing minutes to process this, ultimately choosing love for her friend over her own absolute terror. As 3 months pass, we watch Elena undergo a remarkable metamorphosis. She transitions from a temporary guest to a permanent fixture in the syndicate leader's life. She absorbs the silent language of the underworld, learning the delicate balance of observation and discretion. Loving someone in the shadows does not equate to a desire for violence. It requires a mutual respect for a deeply flawed moral compass. Roman elevates her status, ensuring every dangerous associate understands she is untouchable, while she secures a refined position at a local art gallery. It serves to show us that the most resilient lives are often built directly upon the ashes of the old. Elena normalizes her surreal existence, sharing casually, ignoring the imposing security detail Roman provides. Simultaneously, her ruthless divorce dismantles her former husband in court. Elena secures the estate, substantial assets, and an airtight restraining order, forcing Victor to the city in utter defeat. When the final dissolution papers arrive on a mundane Tuesday, she signs them with a steady hand and a dry eye. That suffocating air is definitively severed. Victor is reduced to a mere phantom, a fading reminder that we must never anchor our worth to those who diminish us. Half a year later, Elena stands by the floor-to-ceiling windows of Roman's penthouse, surveying the glittering sky like a monarch. Roman approaches quietly, anchoring her with his arms and resting his chin against her shoulder. The contrast between his lethal nature and this quiet tenderness is striking. He asks where her mind has wandered. She reflects on the staggering transformation of her reality. When he questions if this new world is better, she leans into his warmth, confirming it absolutely is. With a soft kiss to her temple, Roman reveals a dense legal portfolio. Inside lies the documentation for a fully operational nonprofit foundation, established in her name. It is designed entirely to help survivors escape abusive dynamics. We see a vital truth here. A genuine partner does not merely shower you with superficial gifts, they hand you the tangible tools required to change the world around you. With a quiet reverence, Roman acknowledges that she survived a psychological battlefield most never return from. He simply thought she might want to guide others out of that same darkness. Tears spill over her lashes. Anticipating her anxiety regarding the origins of the wealth, Roman assures her every cent is entirely legitimate. There is no blood money involved, only clean resources repurposed for genuine healing. She kisses him with a profound, desperate gratitude. They linger in the fading light, two deeply scarred individuals who carved out a strange, beautiful sanctuary together. It reminds us that while a perfect life is an absolute myth, raw authenticity can build empires. 2 years later, Elena's foundation has expanded its reach across 5 major metropolitan centers. The foundation has successfully extracted hundreds of women from living nightmares, providing crucial legal defense, secure housing, and intensive trauma therapy. Elena commands this network daily, forging her past suffering into an impenetrable shield for the vulnerable. Roman supports her from the shadows, a silent benefactor, ready to deploy vast resource at a moment's notice. You and I must acknowledge that their dynamic defies conventional morality. He continues to navigate a violent underworld while she operates in the light. Yet, they have cultivated an unbreakable bond of trust. There are no hidden agendas between them. They prove that the most resilient partnerships are forged in the fires of brutal honesty, far removed from the superficial perfection society expects. One evening, Elena returns to find Roman waiting with an exceptionally rare vintage of champagne. When she questions the celebration, he reveals a monumental shift. The relentless federal investigation against him has collapsed, officially closed due to a complete lack of evidence. Pouring the golden liquid, he exhales a breath he seemed to have held for years. Elena studies the lines of his face, asking if the pressure had been weighing on him. He confesses that the fear of losing their life together is a constant companion. Hours later, the silence of the bedroom surrounds them. Tracing idle patterns over his chest, Elena quietly asks if he ever regrets the path he walked. It is a profound lesson for us all. Intimacy requires us to bravely unpack the emotional burdens of the ones we love. Roman hesitates, asking her to clarify. Elena speaks of the blood on his hands, the syndicate he rules, and the cold man he was forced to become. A heavy, absolute stillness fills the room. Finally, Roman admits that the weight of his sins does haunt him, often striking in the dead of night when the psychological toll threatens to crush his spirit. But then, he turns his gaze to her. He reflects on the loyalty of his men, the fragile order he maintains, and the undeniable fact that his darkness led him to her. He pulls her hand to his chest, marveling that she saw the monster within him and chose to anchor him anyway. It leaves us with a resonant truth. We all harbor regrets that steal our sleep. But finding the soul who accepts our shadows makes walking through the darkness worthwhile. Elena kisses his shoulder, whispering her love. The phrase carries the heavy weight of survival tonight. Roman draws her near, echoing the sentiment. They sleep not as fairy tale archetypes, but as fractured souls forming a beautiful mosaic. Let us leap 3 years past the chaos of the ballroom. We find Elena at the podium of a glittering fundraiser. The hall hums with elites wearing philanthropy like a mask. Yet, hidden entirely in the unlit corners stands Roman. His underworld reputation keeps him completely out of sight, but his presence is an absolute certainty. The underlying lesson is simple. True devotion never demands the spotlight. It only requires the quiet satisfaction of watching the one you love illuminate the darkness. You and I are going to unpack this sequence together, because the visual storytelling is brilliant. Elena finishes a powerful address about delivering resources to survivors. The elite clamor for her attention, eager to associate with her moral victory. But that noise fades as her eyes find Roman in the shadows. He offers a single nod, a quiet testament to her triumph. Later, on their penthouse balcony, the cinematic tension peaks. The city's sprawl glows beneath them like a bed of embers. Roman turns to face her, and the terrifying patriarch of the underworld is visibly trembling. Here is a fundamental truth we can all learn. When an architect of violence loses his iron composure, the foundation of his entire world is about to permanently shift. The stoic kingpin finally dismantles his own armor. Roman confesses his awareness of their chaotic reality and the harsh judgment she faces. Then he delivers a line that completely recontextualizes his character. He admits she sparks a desperation within him to become a better man. He reveals a velvet box housing a diamond of staggering value. His proposal is framed not as a polite question, but as a plea from a man who has always commanded, never asked. Tears spill over her cheeks as she accepts. His hands, usually so steady when holding a weapon, shake violently as he slides the ring home. The takeaway is clear: true vulnerability is terrifying. If a permanent commitment does not make a person tremble with its immense weight, it is simply not worth making at all. Breaking their embrace, a tearful laugh escapes Elena. She points out the glaring danger his rivals will despise this union. Roman remains unfazed, welcoming their hatred. He asserts that any hand raised against her will answer to his brutal vengeance. Elena smiles, calling him her savior. He rejects the title, claiming he is no white knight, but she insists he is hers. We must understand that this narrative actively rejects the typical fairy tale structure. There is no magical sanctuary. Roman will perpetually remain a target, and her trauma is not erased. The ultimate lesson here is profound. Authentic love is never about securing a completely harmless existence. It is about identifying the one soul who makes the catastrophic risks entirely worth taking. 5 years after the devastating implosion of her old life, Elena takes the Castelli name. The guest list features only Maya. The guest list are of a handful of allies and a perimeter of lethal enforcers in bespoke tailoring. There is no media spectacle, just 2 hardened survivors forging an unbreakable pact. Delivering her vows, Elena holds his gaze. She bypasses the terrifying persona of the crime lord, speaking directly to the man who would incinerate the earth for her safety. She vows brutal honesty and promises to never reduce him to a mere instrument of violence. This brings us to a beautiful realization. Real love is simply the act of witnessing the entirety of a person's darkness and light, and deliberately choosing to stay. The narrative subverts toxic tropes often found in this genre. The city's feared patriarch stands at the altar and dismantles his own authority. He vows to guard her without ever building a cage. He swears to be the silent architect behind her empire, proving his worth daily. This devotion's immersed profound gratitude she witnessed darkest corners and never looked away. La Union. During the reception, Mia asked the bride if this joy is actually real. Elena gazes across the hall, catching the eye of her lethal husband. He offers a soft, genuine smile meant only for her. Yes, she answers, I really am. The lesson here is profound. True freedom is only ever found beside those who actively protect our peace. Maya embraces her sister, confessing that the groom still chills her to the bone. Elena laughs, acknowledging his aura of fear. Yet Maya identifies the crux of their dynamic. The monster does not frighten the maiden. We flash forward a decade past the ballroom tragedy. Together, they have forged a formidable dual empire. Elena commands a philanthropic syndicate spanning 20 cities, using legal defense and safe houses to read the destinies of survivors. Parallel to her light, Roman navigates the gray zones of his trade. He is methodically laundering his legacy, shifting toward legitimate enterprises so the shadows cannot follow them. The underlying lesson is simple. True growth within a partnership is a deliberate, shared evolution toward peace. We must analyze his character arc. Roman will never achieve complete moral purity. Violence is deeply encoded in his DNA. However, he redirects his nature, wielding his immense power as a shield rather than a blade. He evolves past the toxic illusion that authority requires a body count. The scene transitions to a quiet evening on their terrace. Elena asks if his mind ever drifts back to the blood-stained ballroom. Roman answers with nuance. He harbors grief over Serafina meeting her demise, mourning the tragedy despite her betrayal. Yet, he harbors zero remorse for the chaotic collision of their worlds. The lesson is striking. You can mourn the collateral damage of your past, while being profoundly grateful for where the wreckage led you. The tranquility breaks when it reveals her parasitic ex-husband, Victor, reached out. Roman undergoes an immediate shift, his posture hardening in the stance of an apex predator. He demands the contents of the message. She explains Victor is exiled in Europe and seeking absolution for his behavior. When Roman asks how she retaliated, Elena delivers a masterclass in boundary setting. She did absolutely nothing. She merely deleted the voicemail. Roman is shocked by her restraint, but her logic is impenetrable. A sudden attack of conscience does not undo the rot of betrayal. She articulates a vital life lesson. Forgiveness is a strictly internal process. It absolutely never requires giving an abuser a second point of entry into your peaceful life. She explains that genuine forgiveness is simply putting down the psychological weight of another person's failures. She pardoned Victor solely to cleanse her own spirit, denying him the satisfaction of a response. Roman studies her with reverence, asking when she cultivated such lethal wisdom. Her counter is sharp. She adapted the moment she wed the city's most dangerous predator and refused to let him swallow her soul. Their shared laughter echoes into the twilight, underscoring a monumental truth. Survival is not the mere avoidance of agony, but the conscious design of who you become once the ash settles. We jump 15 years past the tragedy. Elena commands a sprawling auditorium, accepting a prestigious award, and finally laying her entire odyssey bare before the public eye. She refuses to sanitize her narrative for the public. She delivers a visceral autopsy of her betrayal, detailing the terror of walking away as her reality disintegrated, and the agonizing labor of constructing a new empire from ashes. She presents a powerful thesis. True resilience is not an immunity to breaking, but the radical choice was to glue the shattered fragments back together. The audience erupts into a thunderous ovation, moved by her vulnerability. Yet, Elena ignores the adoration. Her gaze anchors entirely on Roman. Time has dusted his hair with silver, but he remains the apex predator who recognized her true worth when she was nothing but dust. When the spectacle concludes, the couple retreats to their car, driving through the neon streets in profound, companionable silence. The facade drops. Elena discards her heels and collapses, exhausted by the emotional weight. Roman settles beside her, a ruthless king acting as a devoted partner. He rests her feet in his lap, praising the magnitude of her speech. The adrenaline fades into quiet intimacy. Elena breaks the silence, asking if he believes they have actually achieved happiness. Roman answers with zero hesitation. He affirms it, clarifying their joy is completely divorced from superficial fairy tales. Their bond was forged by violently stripping away every comforting illusion. They gazed into the abyss of each other's darkest trauma and stood their ground. Our final lesson is clear. The most indestructible form of happiness is the one you build with your own bare hands. The path they chose is heavy, layered with complications, yet it breathes a rare and brutal honesty. Elena wouldn't trade the beautiful chaos of their existence for anything. They are two survivors who willingly walk through the flames, emerging with scars that act as armor. 2 decades have passed since that fateful night in the ballroom. Elena now stands in the quiet authority of her foundation's headquarters, surrounded by the living proof of her redemption. A trembling woman approaches, tentatively addressing her as Miss Castelli. Elena softens, gently insisting she just use her first name. Tears spill from the woman's eyes as she whispers her gratitude, thanking Elena for providing the legal protection and the physical sanctuary that finally broke her chains. The woman confesses she once thought her story was over, but today she's helping pull others from the dark. Elena's voice thickens with emotion. She tells her that she survived because of her own fierce strength. The Foundation merely handed her a flashlight. But the survivor shakes her head, delivering a profound truth. She survived because someone finally believed she could. When the room empties, Elena stands in the silence, letting the weight of 20 years wash over her. Her mind drifts back to that ballroom, the crushing betrayal, and Roman emerging from the shadows to fracture her reality. She used to be a ghost in her own life, terrified of taking up space. Today, she is a titan who dictates her own terms. Her ascent was far from clean. It was steeped in moral ambiguity, but it was authentic, and authenticity will always eclipse the illusion of perfection. A sudden vibration breaks her reverie. It is a message from Roman, requesting a quiet dinner. A knowing smile touches her lips as she replies with a single word: always. Hours later, they sit in the dim glow of the very same coffee shop where their story began. It is a quiet ritual, a tether to their origins. Roman reaches across the worn wooden table. He takes her hand, his eyes holding that same dangerous, consuming intensity from 20 years ago. He speaks softly, reminding her of the time that has passed, and asks if she carries any regrets. Elena lets the question linger, her mind tracing the violent terrain they had to cross. She measures the cost the enemies made, the constant shadow of danger against the empire of salvation she built with a king of the underworld. Holding his gaze, she tells him she wouldn't change a single second. Roman's face softens into a smile meant only for her. Stick with me, because this is where the pieces truly align. Sitting across from a man most people fear, Elena understands something profound about human resilience. Betrayal didn't destroy her life. It acted as the painful alarm clock she desperately needed. It forced her to abandon the hollow comfort of a lie and embrace a difficult, messy truth. She gathered the shattered fragments of her innocence and forged them into something unbreakable. The disaster was merely the match that burned down her prison. You and I have probably both felt that sting of failure. But consider this: the darkest hour of your life is often the very threshold to your greatest awakening. The trauma doesn't magically dissolve, but you simply stop shrinking away from your own power. Outside the frost-kissed windows of that cafe, the city's relentless cycle of greed and ruin. Yet inside, sitting quietly in the corner, are force of nature who defied every convention to stand side by side. They uncovered a truth that escapes most people. Genuine love isn't some flawless cinematic romance. It is about looking at someone who knows your most shameful, unhinged shadows and seeing them choose to stay. It is finding the rare partner who hands you the bricks to build your empire. We all deserve a mirror that reflects our strength, not our damage. Elena returns the pressure of Roman's grip, feeling the steady rhythm of his pulse. In that quiet exchange, the lingering ghost of the frightened girl she once was finally dissolves into the air. Elena Castelli never needed a hero on a white horse. She became her own savior, claiming her autonomy while daring to experience an unconventional love. This is the ultimate victory. It isn't found in a blaze of vengeful glory, but in the quiet confidence of a woman who refused to be shattered. She turned the ashes of a betrayal into fortress, proving that sometimes finding sanctuary means standing beside the most dangerous shadow in the city. The cycle of fear is broken, leaving only in denial power.
One of the most powerful moments in the story is when Elena leaves the private suite after discovering Victor's affair. She does not collapse. She does not fight Sarafina. She does not beg her husband to explain. She simply looks at the man who betrayed her and understands that the marriage had already ended the moment he chose another woman. This moment carries a strong educational lesson. Walking away is not weakness. It is often the highest form of strength. Many people stay in painful relationships because they are afraid of losing history, comfort, family approval, or financial security. They tell themselves things might improve. They accept apologies that are not backed by change. They mistake endurance for loyalty. But Elena shows that loyalty to someone else should never require betrayal of yourself. Victor tries to explain, but his explanation is empty. He says it just happened, as if betrayal were an accident instead of a choice. Elena understands that a person who lies for months does not simply make one mistake. They make repeated decisions to disrespect the person who trusts them. Her decision to file for divorce is not only legal action, it is emotional liberation. She begins to reclaim her life, her identity, and her voice. She deletes Victor's messages. She refuses to be pulled back into his guilt. She learns that closure does not always come from a conversation with the person who hurt you. Sometimes closure comes from refusing to let them hurt you again. For viewers, this lesson matters deeply. You do not have to keep explaining your pain to someone who caused it knowingly. You do not have to stay just because you once loved them. Sometimes the bravest sentence is not "please stay," it is "I already left."